taking the time to join us for our fourth installment of our CSP webinar series. This one being on monitoring and managing access to the cloud. Originally, this was scheduled to be presented by Rick Streckel on our team, but his workload became a little bit overwhelming. So I've jumped in and I've asked Jim Hopkins to also kind of jump in with me a little bit here near the end to take over for Rick. So our topic is going to be on, as I said, monitoring and managing access. We're going to talk about some of the tools and capabilities that are available to you to ensure you can understand what's going on in your environment. As in our previous webinars, don't hesitate to come off mute and interrupt me if you have any questions. You can use the raise your hand feature in Teams to also kind of put a flag up there that you have a question, and Jim, if you would be so kind to monitor the chat, that would be appreciated, and let me know if there is a hand raised. But otherwise, let's go ahead and dive in. So one of the first things when we look at monitoring your environment to know what's going on, the Unified Audit Log. You may be familiar with this, you might not be. It depends on how deep you've kind of drilled into some of the cloud capabilities, but the Unified Audit Log is where we track all user activity as well as all admin activity. So user actions such as sharing a file, deleting a file, creating a sharing link. Now those are all trackable activities, and those are contained in the Unified Audit Log. But we also track any admin activities. So if an admin makes a configuration change to one of the services, we see that as well. This must be enabled to be active in your tenant, and honestly, for most new tenants, this should be on by default. But a lot of us have some older tenants that may not have had this enabled by default. But we can do that in the security and compliance portal, and I'll show that in here in a second. The very strange thing that might be confusing is when you try to use the Unified Audit Logs, it does require specific permissions. As a global admin, that's not going to be a problem. But the permissions exist in Exchange Online, and that might confuse you because the Unified Audit Log is supposed to see everything, not just email. And the reason for that is because the PowerShell commandlets used to manage the audit log live with Exchange Online Management Shell. And therefore, the permissions are actually in Exchange Online. And those are the compliance manager and the org manager management role groups. The global admin accounts automatically have membership into the org management, so that's not a problem. But if you needed to delegate this out to a subset of users to review the audit log on a regular basis, you would actually have to add them to the Exchange Online org management or compliance management role groups. The logs that are contained in the Unified Audit Log are retained based on the license level of the user. So if I'm an E3 user, an Office 365 E3 user, by default, all my activities are retained, all the logs for my activities are retained for 90 days. But if I have an E5 license, that extends up to 1 year. We can change the retention policy for audit logs if we wanted to, but it's actually very limited in what we can modify it to, and I'll show you that here in a second too. It might not really make sense to modify the retention of those. But one thing I do want to point out is audit login is not real time. So when you see when you're trying to troubleshoot or track something that's happening, if you're trying to see something that happened within the last 5 minutes, most likely you're not going to see that in the audit log. Most events appear within 30 minutes. But there are a handful of categories that are indicated can take up to 24 hours to appear in the Unified Audit Log. And this is just because the vast data collection that Microsoft is doing and compiling that into log analytics, essentially, that's underneath the hood. But things like Yammer, surprisingly, Yammer can take up to 24 hours activity in Yammer to show up in the audit log. But Power Platform and Azure AD events are stated to take up to 24 hours, but we often see Azure AD events much quicker than 24 hours. We can disable the Unified Audit Log, but I'm not really sure why we'd want to. It doesn't really cost us anything to have it enabled. But the only way to disable it is actually through PowerShell. So let me jump over then to my demo tenant here. I can remember which browser I was using for it. Okay, so kind of ahead of myself in my demo, but the security and compliance portal is where we find the audit log. You can find that here, and that's the protection.office.com portal, not the individual security or the individual compliance portal, but the protection.office.com portal. If you go down to search, you'll see audit log search. Now, if you have an older tenant and you haven't enabled unified audit login, you'll see a little button up here that says go ahead and enable it. But we don't need to do that. Whoops. We don't need to do that because I've already got it enabled in my demo tenant here. But if we did want to do that, if we wanted to enable or disable, that's all via PowerShell. One of the things I want to point out is that, as I mentioned before, all the commandlets live in Exchange Online. So when we manage the audit log from PowerShell, we actually have to connect to Exchange Online. If you're not aware, there is a new PowerShell module out there for Exchange Online that is native to PowerShell. It's not a web app or anything like that that's unique just for Exchange Online. You can go get it from GitHub or download it from Microsoft, but it gives you the ability, if we wanted to import module here, it's called Exchange Online Management. And then that gives us this ability to use the Connect Exchange Online instead of the older, I think it was EXOPSS session or something like that, that lived outside of your standard PowerShell. Now we can just call a modern authentication prompt to Exchange Online from any PowerShell console. Let me grab the credentials for this. Remember where I put those as well. So grab my admin user, password. All right. Oh, and my MFA is kicking off here. Give me 1 second while I get a text notification. All right. So once we connect, you'll see all the commands being imported here. We can disable the audit log, or we can check its status with the portal, and that's through the get admin audit log config. And instead of seeing the entire config, I'm just going to say select unified because I really just want to see that attribute. You can see here the unified audit log ingestion is enabled, set to true. So we know it's enabled. If I wanted to disable that, I would simply run the commandlet set admin audit log config and pass it to switch 4 unified audit log ingestion enabled, set that to false. I'm not going to hit enter here because I don't want to disable it, but if you did need to disable it, this is how you would do it. I can't really think of a reason why, but maybe you have a unique use case to where disabling this audit log is necessary. But that's how you would go about doing that. In the search, though, let me do a quick demo on the content we see. So if I want to see documents that were shared or activities related to sharing, I'll type in here the activity is related to sharing. I'll just select all of them by doing the top level. And let me just put this back to October 1st since my demo was created about then, and then click search. Now, this is going to pop up all the events that occurred related to sharing, and some of them here are under my admin account. Some of them are under this Megan B account. Let me open this up so you can see the item listed here, though, will show us exactly what's been. Okay, whoops, I want to click on the event. Sorry, wrong thing. So the item here is telling me exactly what's being shared out. So Megan decided to share out this international marketing strategy document. There's a file type, or it could be a folder, it could be a site. It will give me all that detail here. But I've detected now that she's shared something out. That's great if I want to come in here and search all the time, but maybe I want to generate an alert when something is shared out. And if I want to be as granular to say, hey, generate alert when this specific file is shared, I could easily do that. From this portal pane here, I've already run a search. If I click on the new alert policy, it's going to pull in what I've got in my search. So if I look down at the send this alert when, or the conditions, come on. Oh, it actually didn't do it this time. It should pull in what you have in the search. And this is actually, you know what, I'll take advantage of this. So I could create an alert when something is shared, but something that you may or may not be familiar with is the concept of a break glass account. If you're not familiar with it, a break glass account is a admin account that has no security applied to it. And that sounds completely backwards. But in the event of a catastrophic failure on Microsoft's end, if they're having an issue with Azure MFA, if they're having an issue with being able to detect Intune compliance, you don't want to have your admin accounts bound by those controls by conditional access and then not be able to access the tenant administratively because Microsoft is having an outage in one of those services. It's very unlikely, but it's not unrealistic or impossible to happen. So we create these accounts called break glass accounts. And essentially, they're just admin accounts with global admin rights that are excluded from all of our conditional access, all of our security. And that's really a bad thing, but it's a necessary evil because it is our way of accessing the tenant when there is a catastrophic failure. But we don't want these accounts to be used. They shouldn't be used at all, other than in catastrophic failure events. So we could create an alert here. So if I wanted to say, you know what, logged in, user logged in, I'll go ahead and select that activity. I'll scope it down to, I think I have a break glass account. Yep. So my admin break glass, this would be that account that's excluded from all my conditional access. And I want to send an alert to my administrator. So now if I saved this alert, every time that admin break glass account is used, someone logs in with it, I get an alert. And so now that account can't be used without some kind of reporting going on, some kind of notification. So you really can't, it reduces the risk that account can be used in a malicious manner. Even though it has no security on it, we're kind of securing it a little bit by keeping an eye on it. And if we see it being used outside of a catastrophic failure event, we can reset the password, we can force it log out of all the sessions, we can take action. Now, remember, I did mention that there was ability to change your retention capabilities on how long these events are retained. Um, I don't think I need to put a name in here, but if we look at the record types, I could be very granular on what I want this retention policy to apply to. So if I didn't want it to apply to all the user activity, I could say, you know what, it's only when something in Azure AD happens. And here's all the activities related to Azure AD. So when someone adds a user, for some reason, I don't want that to be retained for the full year because I have an E5 license. I just want that to be 90 days, or I want that to be 6 months. I can change that retention here, but I don't really have that granular control, right? I mean, if all my other users are E3, that's 90 days by default. So all I can really do is reduce down an E5 user to the same retention of an E3 user. So does that really provide value? To me, I don't think so, but I'll leave that up to anyone else out there that may need to reduce their retention policy of these audit log events. Let me jump back into my presentation then. Okay. So the next item is Office 365 usage reports. And I'm sure most of you have seen these. When you log in the Office 365, the M365 admin portal, they're kind of popped up there in your face. There's a little item there on the left for reports. You can see the reports, and these are really designed to give you insights on what's being used in your environment. The data does go back to up to 180 days, but in all honesty, if I'm looking at this, these reports don't provide me a whole lot of value from detecting any issues or errors in my environment. It's really just showing me who's using what. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just probably not going to be one of your go-to reports that you review on a regular basis. The cool thing is, though, we can hook this up to Power BI. That we can a dashboard that Microsoft has created for all this usage. So you don't always have to go to the portal to see your current usage. You could leverage BI for that. And I'm actually going to show you what that looks like. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to jump into our actual improving tenant. If I remember what browser that was. Here we go. So if I look at our improvement tenant, and the reason I'm looking at our improvement tenant is because we actually have data in here. If I look at my demo tenant, you're just going to see the flat lines here because there's no activity in my demo tenant. But what we see here There's a lot of the activity going on in our environment over the last 30 days. I could take this out to 180 if I wanted to. If I scroll down, we can see individual service activities. So email, we see active users, we see OneDrive. We've got about 1 million files stored in OneDrive, 3.4 terabytes of data up there. I can see Teams activity, but if I want to drill down a little bit deeper, I can click on View More here. And now I'm seeing a couple of charts here on the left. This is the number of activities being performed on any given day. On the right, it's the number of users performing those activities, which can be a little bit confusing when you try to compare the two. But you might look here and say, you know what, my channel messages, I've got a flat line here, but my chat messages are really high. Even my one-to-one calls and total meetings are really low. But if I look at the data, if I hover over a data point here, we're looking at 6,000 chat messages versus 170 channel messages. So it's not that we're not using channels, we're not using call and one-to-one call in our meetings. Proportionally, we just see a lot more of chat messages. And that's kind of reflected over here, the number of users performing each action. You can see here it's now a flat line, that there's no channel messages at all, or users performing channel messages. We just don't do as many of them in comparison, especially on, what was this day? Almost 20,000 chat messages on October 8th. But from this view here, I also can see who's doing what. So, Kristen here, we can see she's sent 3 channel messages in the last 30 days, 162 chat messages. So I get some insights in how users are actually using this. I could interpret this and say, you know what, we don't use channel messaging well enough. Maybe we need to educate our employees on how to best leverage teams and channels and teams within teams to communicate and collaborate better. We're really dependent on our one-to-one chat messages. Maybe we just need to educate everyone and teach them how to best use teams and channels specifically. So that might be an insight I take away from here. The other cool thing is I can look over here on device usage, and I can see what kind of devices are being used. So big quantity of Windows, that's our largest one, but we do have a lot of Mac. A lot of web clients being used. I'll jump down here. Kristen again shows up here. She's using a Mac and iOS for all her access to Teams. But it gives us some details, and I could click into some of these and see more individual details. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to expose too much about our internal environment on the public webinar. But let me jump over to my demo tenant real quick. And then I can show you what it looks like to set up the Power BI for this. So if you log into Power BI, and you do have to have a Power BI Pro license to set this up. The dashboards and everything are free connectors from Microsoft, but to set it up, you do have to have a Pro license. So that's included in the Office 365 E5. But if I look here on the left, I can go to Apps, click on Get Apps. I'm just going to type Microsoft in here. And scroll down. I'm probably going to miss it the first time. There we go. So Microsoft 365 usage. I'll click on that. And then this is really going to set up a connector to the data. I'll go ahead and say Get Now, and this is going to install it into my Power BI instance. But this is going to look at all that same data that that those dashboards that the admin center here. If I went back to Office 365 and looked at my usage reports, I don't want to have to come into the portal every time to see this and then have to drill down in individual pages. And if I can connect Power BI and I can use the desktop client for Power BI, I can see all this just from my desktop. And the cool thing is Microsoft actually makes the Power BI file for this dashboard available, publicly available. So you can download it, you can tweak it, you can modify it so that you can make it kind of your own. Now, I'm not going to go through the process of connecting my data. This is just using some demo data here, but if I said connect data, this would go back and actually pull statistics from the environment. It would take several minutes for that to go through, and I don't think everyone wants to sit here and watch a wheel spin for several minutes. But this is the kind of details you can get from the Power BI. It's the same stuff, but it's maybe a little more consolidated. You still have that drill down capability. So if we wanted to look at, what was going on Let's see here, from a communication standpoint, we can see all the emails being read, all the emails being sent. So it kind of breaks it out, that table view, a little bit easier for you to digest. And we can, everything's contextual here. So we click on individual data points and we can see the data behind that. So just an option you can do with Power BI. The other cool thing that I'll just mention since I'm here is I'm going to go back to Get Apps. I'm not going to go through the whole process to install this one, but there is a cool Intune app here for Intune compliance. If you're using Intune for device compliance, this is a cool way to check to see how your device compliance stands, what's not compliant, why is it not compliant, and then be able to drill down into that compliance. There's no report or dashboard built in Intune, at least not right now, that gives you this level of detail. This is actually connecting back to the Intune data lake that isn't fully exposed in the portal to give you all this detail. So that's kind of a cool one. I'll just kind of throw out there as another option to leverage, excuse me, to leverage Power BI for. All right, real quick, any questions before I move on to our next topic? All right.
Hey, Chris, do you want to touch on the base licensing to get to a lot of these reports? So you do have to have a premium tenant for Azure AD P1.
Yes. So technically the reports are visible regardless of your licensing, but what data shows up for you will be dependent on your licensing. So if I go back to Office, our improving tenant here, if I go look at the usage, no, actually, no, this isn't the I think we're jumping ahead to the security reports, Jim. The usage reports, these are all available regardless of your licensing. But only things that you have licensed will show up. So, for some reason, if if you only have Exchange Online, you're not going to see Teams activity. But that leads into my next topic, though, on the security reports, and this is where licensing does come into play, because it pulls in events from different security capabilities. So specifically like compromised users. Well, that's an Azure AD premium feature. So if you don't have it licensed, you're not going to see the data there. AIP usage. Again, that's a premium feature. If you don't have licensing for Azure Information Protection, you're not going to see details there. I typically look at the security reports as being much more valuable because they're going to show us insights that we can take action on, rather than just who's using what. That doesn't necessarily mean anything's broken or that we're vulnerable. The security reports do tell us if something's broken or if we're vulnerable. These are cool because they do provide us a lot of insight. A lot of it is focused on email, though. A lot of the capabilities are email related because email is one of the largest threat vectors for cloud environments. Phishing attacks are huge, and the most successful attack against cloud customers today. So you'll see a lot. Let me jump over to the portal because I'd rather spend more time in the portal than on a slide. 1 second. I'm doing this in our improving tenant. Gotta remember which one I'm jumping in, our demo or improving. So when you go to the security reports, you can the Microsoft 365 admin portal. If you click on security and compliance, it's not giving us any reports. It's pretty much just giving us a link to jump over to protection.office.com, the security compliance portal. And here it's just listed as the dashboard. So this is what this link would take us to. It would just jump us over here. So while this loads, it's going to give us some top insights, what it sees happening in our tenant. So this is our improving tenant. It's a production tenant. You can see here we've got a lot of phishing campaigns being conducted against our environment, which might be alarming if we're not keeping an eye on those. But as I mentioned, from a licensing perspective, labels, these are AIP, Azure Information Protection label data. We're not actively using that. We have licensing for it, but we don't actually use it. So the data is not showing up here for us. The same thing would happen if we weren't licensed altogether. But if you're not using the feature, if you're not licensed for the feature, you just get these empty boxes. But there is still a lot in here outside of the AIP. You can see here compromised users. Luckily, we have 0, but that's an Azure AD Premium. If we didn't have Azure AD Premium license for all our users, we're not going to see any data here. But as I mentioned before, a lot of these are email related. And some of these pull from some heightened licensing from the Office 365 ATP, which gives you like the safe links, the anti-spoofing or advanced anti-spoofing, safe attachments. So data being pulled into here is, even though it's just email, it may require some of the advanced licensing as well. But you can click into any of these reports and see more data. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the threat protection status. If I click the chart, it gives me more details into there. Once it loads, come on, still loading the top. So anyways, this is going to show me all of my malware and phishing attempts against my environment. But if I get a little more granular, I could click on individual filters here or highlight individual filters here to see on the bar chart. But if I want to look a little more in depth, I can drill down into this report by looking at the underlying data. So if I go to email phish, you have this option here to view details table. I'm not going to click on that because it'll start showing you all the details of all the individual messages and people. Again, trying to limit what we're actually showing from our production environment. But I'm doing this in our production environment because the demo tenant just doesn't have a lot of data here to give you a good idea of what's actually happening. But if I look at in these individual days, I can hover over a day and I can see exactly what's going on. We had 342 domain impersonations occur. So maybe something I should be alarmed about. But the other cool thing here is I'm seeing an incident, a little red triangle right here. That means something bad has actually happened. And that happened yesterday on 10/12. If I open that up, it gives me the incident page. Now I see that I had users targeted as a phishing campaign, and here's my users. Curtis Height is in here. He's our CEO. So that's not surprising that he's in here because he would be considered a high value target for a phish campaign. But within this now, I can say, you know what, this is something I'm actively working on. So I can change the alert or the incident status to, hey, I'm investigating. It will be assigned to me. So everyone else that's an admin can say, hey, someone else is working on this. I can say it's resolved, or, you know what, I'm just really going to ignore it. I can also suppress this so that it doesn't come up in the future for 30 days. Or I can create an alert similar to what we just did in the unified admin logs. So if I wanted to, I can take a lot of action just by jumping through these reports. Now I can get to these panes through different portals. But why do I have to jump back through the alerts pane up here to drill down to get to what I really want to do right here if I'm looking at it from the report? I think, is there anything else I wanted to cover on this one? Oh yeah, scheduling. Whoops, let me jump back into. So the scheduling of these reports. So let's say, as I mentioned, this data is retained for 180 days. Let's say that you wanted to have a snapshot point in time, a report sent to you every month. Well, we can create a schedule for this. So if I wanted this phish report to be sent to me every month, I could do that. If I look at the schedule here, I can say, you know what, every week, or I can say every month. I want to start it today. And then when do I want to end it? If I want it to run indefinitely, I'll just put in a very long date in here, and it'll just keep running. Every month, or every week, I'll get an email notification. I can filter this down a little bit based on what report I'm looking at. So this report was looking at phishing. If I wanted to say, you know what, I only want to see phishing when sent from a specific sender, or phishing being sent to specific recipients in my tenant, I could filter down the report that way. Then who do I want to notify? Right now it's going to be my global admin account, but maybe I want to notify our compliance team. That way, every week they get an email with this report. Now, the reports aren't going to be these pretty graphs or anything like that. It's going to be raw data. The same thing here is if I requested or export a report, it's going to just give me the raw data. Let me just scroll down here. So if I look at scheduled reports, I don't think I actually scheduled one. But if I went through that process and hit create schedule, we see one listed here. But I did create one before to where I can download the data. So this is one that did run. It's a report that was sent out. I can go ahead, come in here, download report, and I'm not going to wait for it. No, it's going to ask me to log in again. Well, I'm not going to go through that process again, but it's going to prompt me to download a CSV file that has all the underlying data of that report. So as I said, it's not pretty reports with graphs and charts or anything. It's really just the raw data. That's what Microsoft is considering a report there. Okay. So at the beginning of our webinar series, we were really focusing on identity, and identity is the core to all of the security. So it only makes sense that from a monitoring perspective, you want to make sure you know what's going on with identity. And the first area we look at is the Azure AD sign-in logs. These are probably going to be the most common logs that we take a look at because they provide a lot of details on logon events. It's going to show us what conditional access policies were applied. It's going to show us where the user was coming from, what kind of device posture that they have. So there's a lot of good detail in those. But sometimes it doesn't contain everything that we want to see. So there's also the Azure Usage Insights. Now, App Insights has been around for a while, and this is going to give you visibility into how many people are using specific apps integrated with Azure AD, how many sign-in attempts are being performed, how many are failing. So it gives you some visibility into how apps are being used, but what was more recently released is the authentication insights. And that's going to look at your Azure MFA and your self-service password reset activity. So we can easily get an idea of how many users are enabled or able to leverage self-service password reset and MFA. How many people have gone through the registration? We typically have to build in the past, we would build a script or a custom report that would pull that information for us. Well, you might be able to get that information through Azure Insights instead. And one of the cool things is that Microsoft just recently released another one for conditional access. And I'm going to show you that one here in a few minutes because it really solves a big problem we had when trying to leverage just the Azure AD sign-in logs and troubleshooting conditional access policies. But the intent of these insights is really to help you understand how apps and authentication are being used across the environment. And then finally, once you figure out, hey, I see a lot of usage here, maybe we have an app like Workday that is a secure app that not many people should be logging into. We use it only for HR. So maybe only our HR team should be logging into it. But you know what? The App Insights shows me that we see a lot of users logging into Workday. That might ring a bell to me and say, you know what? I might need to review who all has access and can access Workday, either as an app or because they're a member of a group that has access to that app. And that's what access reviews introduces. It's a way for us to kick off a workflow that validates and recertifies people's access to apps and or memberships into security groups. And the intent of this is to really minimize orphaned access. So as job roles change, as people come and go in the environment, you might forget to remove them from a group, or you might not put them in the right group, or they may retain access to an application that they no longer need, but it has sensitive information. That's where access reviews can help. And if you have a full identity management solution in place that does lifecycle management for your identities, that might minimize some of the potential that access reviews has for you, but these are very powerful capabilities within the access reviews. And this does unfortunately require an Azure AD P2 license, but licensing is kind of tricky. Not every user has to be assigned a license. It's based on who's creating the access review and then who's reviewing those reviews. And I'll make a little bit more sense when I walk through on the demo. So let me jump into, first off, my demo tenant here. All right. So let me jump over to Azure AD. So the sign-in logs, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the Azure AD sign-in logs because we've probably all seen them, but it's in the Azure portal under Azure Active Directory. And then if you go down to monitoring, there is sign-ins on the left here. Excuse me. And if I look here, you can see all the login activity that's occurred. You can see here I had my administrative account. I was logging in. I'll grab that event. I was logging in, going to Microsoft Exchange, REST API. So that's my PowerShell. When I just logged into PowerShell there, this is that event. If I wanted to look at what device I was coming from, it's a Windows 10 device. It's not managed. It's not compliant. If I want to look at what kind of authentication I provided, well, I did have to provide MFA, but here I also had a cloud managed password, so we're not doing directory sync or federated authentication, but also says I used text messaging as my multi-factor challenge. If I used a app or a app passcode, that would show up here instead, but it's telling me exactly what method I used. Then I can see what conditional access policy is applied. I have one here for require MFA for global admins, two others that weren't applied because they're disabled. But then we also have this report only that shows us any conditional access policies that are set to report only mode. So they didn't actually impact my login event, but if I'm trying to test a new policy, it can show me whether that policy would have applied or not. Now, this goes back to the new capability in conditional access for insights, because if I wanted to get all the activity related to a conditional access policy that I'm testing out, I would have to drill through each individual authentication log here to find out where that policy was applied. That's going to be a nightmare. So the new insights gives us some more capability around that. But another thing I want to point out here on the conditional access tab, even though I was successful, let's say I failed. Something that a lot of people overlook is this three little ellipses here. If I click on that, I can show details. And this is going to show me all the details of the policy and what was satisfied and what wasn't satisfied. So we can see here from a scope perspective, it's applied because my user account is the administrative account. I was trying to access an application that is within the scope of the policy as well. My grant control was simply MFA, and I satisfied that. But if, let's say, I had to come from a trusted device and provide MFA, it would show me MFA and trusted device satisfied here, or failed. One of those maybe failed. So I would get a little red X here saying, hey, I didn't complete the access controls. Now I know exactly where to look to troubleshoot that policy. Let me jump over to our improvement tenant. Again, it helps to have actual data here on the insights. So if I look at the insights, and I'm not going to, we have enough apps here. If I try to sort this by descending in the number of authentication attempts or sign-ins, it'll take a minute or two to refresh, but let's see if we can find one here that does. All right, so we have a bunch of apps down here. You can see here there's been authentication attempts. There's been no failed sign-ins to this poly, but Sonar Cloud had one failed authentication attempt. And I could click over here and see all the activity related to that application. That's another thing the sign-in logs don't really give us a good filter for sometimes, is I can see everything related to this app by using the insights, by clicking the sign-in activity listed for it. The other cool thing is the authentication methods. So here I can see we have 2,258 accounts enabled for self-service password reset. But it might be alarming that I only have 1,280 registered for self-password reset. Now, given that Improvement just acquired Object Partners and iTexico earlier this year, and we're in the process of pulling them over into our tenant, maybe that's not really a concern because we're still onboarding those recently acquired offices into our Improvement environment. So that's maybe a reason I'm not going to be too concerned at that point. But I could click drill into these and get more details. The other thing down here is I can see in the last 30 days who registered an authentication method. And I can see 81 people successfully registered SMS for multi-factor authentication. 6 people successfully registered for email. App notifications, 22. If I look over here at the usage, now we can see for self-service password reset and account unlocks, for the last 30 days, we had 67 attempts to where someone successfully reset their password, unlock their account using SMS. So I'm getting some details on how our authentication methods are being used. This tells me, if I go back to the registration for sure, this tells me in the last 30 days, people aren't registering for the apps. And if app is what I want and we should be using as our primary means of authentication, that tells me I need to start pushing our employees to start registering the apps instead, because the app notification or the app code is much more secure than SMS and email. So that tells me we need to take some action there. The last part is on the conditional access. So if you go to conditional access, we now see insights and reporting listed here. And underneath the hood, this is all Azure Log Analytics collecting this data for us. And these portals are just a way to present that data. And I'm actually going to talk about Azure Log Analytics and Monitor here in a minute. But here I can say, you know what? I want to look at all the details related to one of my policies, something I couldn't do before in Azure AD sign-in logs. But now I can say, you know what? I want to look at all of the activities, or how did our, let's see, require MFA for Workday. That's an enabled policy. That's going to show me all the activity related to that policy itself. We had 569 users authenticate, but 545 didn't have this applied. Now, this is only for the last 24 hours. So that tells me about 24 people in the last 24 hours have logged in, used Workday. This doesn't say 569 people logged into Workday. It just says that's how many login attempts have occurred. But if I want to see how many have been a success, go ahead and click on the Success tab, and I can see information related to how these authentication attempts were successful, looking at the device state, looking at the platform, but I can also see who's logging in. So I can see Griffin here logged in 5 times the workday. If I wanted to drill into the individual login or activities, the events themselves, I could do that. Now, one thing that's not there yet, if I wanted to look at Ken Chase here and I want to look at his actual details on that login, I can't click in this table. But what I could do is take the correlation ID, copy that, go back to my Azure AD sign-ins and use that as my search to find this event. So if you wanted to go back to that data, you could. Unfortunately, it's just not a contextual click in this graph. But if I wanted to narrow it down to all of Griffin's attempts here, click on Griffin, and I get a nice view of all of Griffin's login attempts to Workday. And they were all success. So I know that he's provided an MFA to log into Workday. So that's a cool way. I don't know if we had any in report only mode. We do have one down here. So going back to the report only mode and conditional access, if you were trying to test this out, the insights and reporting gives us a very easy way now to identify, is our report only mode policy applying the way we want it to? Otherwise, we'd have to go to all of those individual AD sign-in logs, and nobody wants to do that. That would just be a nightmare to filter through. Any questions before I continue on from there? Okay. All right, I know I'm talking fast, but we've still got a little bit more to get through here. So next topic is on some of the capabilities in Azure. So a lot of what we've talked about so far is data that's being presented to us via portals, but underneath the hood, it's log analytics that is doing that. Microsoft is dumping all this stuff to their own log analytics and just presenting the data into reports and dashboards that they've custom built for us in their portals. But we do want to talk about Azure Monitor and Azure Sentinel because there's a lot of data that's going into log analytics, and we've seen a couple of the portals. But let's say that you have other systems out there, firewalls, other applications, other devices out there that you want to monitor. You can do that, and that's going to be Azure Sentinel, and Jim will talk about that here in a minute. But to understand, and this was very confusing to me, to understand how does log analytics relate to Azure Monitor, and how does that relate to Azure Sentinel? So hopefully this diagram helps clarify a little bit. But log analytics is your backbone for all login data. It is pretty much all of the services. So it's going to be it's a login tool. It's just collecting a lot of events and logs. It was formerly known as Operations Management Suite, or OMS, but now we call it Log Analytics. And you might often hear it referred to as Azure Monitor as well, but Azure Monitor uses Log Analytics. The key thing about Log Analytics is, for the most part, and I'm generalizing here, it doesn't really do anything by itself. You have to put solutions on top of it. And like Azure Sentinel is a solution that goes on top of Log Analytics. But if we wanted to start taking some automated action, start doing something, that's where Azure Monitor and Azure Sentinel come into play. So Monitor, think of it as your basic automated response to event detections. If you wanted to identify there's high CPU usage across certain VMs for a prolonged period of time, trigger an alert. We can do that through Azure Monitor. But the main thing to note about Azure Monitor is that it's really it is just that, it's a monitor of the events. It's not using any machine learning or advanced capabilities to analyze the data on its own. It's just kind of triggering alerts and automation that you define based on what you want it to see. And that's where Sentinel really comes into play. And if you're not familiar with Sentinel, it is a cloud SIEM hosted by Microsoft. But this is where Microsoft's starting to pull in some of the actual understanding of what it sees in log analytics to understand, hey, there's some kind of security threat that we should be aware of. So jumping into Monitor, and if you're a Halo geek, you probably recognize the background there as the monitor from Halo. But as I said before, Azure Monitor builds on top of log analytics. It's what's our first step into being able to automate some responses. But we have to define what those are. It's not going to have the built-in intelligence natively. Now, there might be some solutions out there that go on top of Monitor that have some of that logic built in automatically. But for the most part, we're defining what do we want to see and what do we want to do if we see it. I'll go back to the VM experiencing high CPU usage for a prolonged period of time. What do we want to do? Well, we can kick off an alert for sure, but maybe there's something PowerShell that we can kick off via Azure automation that kills certain processes running on that server. But it's very basic, and I don't want to downplay it at all. But if you're really looking to take proactive actions to anything that you detect, that's really where Sentinel comes into play. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim to kind of speak on Sentinel. Let me give you control here, Jim.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, you'll have to kill your screen share, and then when I go into my into the demo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Azure Sentinel today, kind of at a high level of kind of what it is. Chris mentioned, it's a cloud-hosted SIEM, security event monitor. So if you don't have a SIEM, Azure Sentinel is very easy to implement and get up and running. It's fairly straightforward. If you have a SIEM, it may be worth looking at connecting the logs and all the things that Chris has talked about into your SIEM. I know some of you guys have already done that. But Sentinel has really grown from its launch probably a year and a half or 2 years ago to where it is. There's a community built up around it on GitHub for all of the things that I'm going to talk about. So it's really grown a lot in the last year, and really in the last 6 months, they've expanded it all out. It is, as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of the tools that are out there leverage the log analytics. Sentinel is obviously another one of those tools, but it gives you that framework to do a lot more in-depth investigation and logging around what you're doing, as well as to do hunting and root detection, incident management, all those type of things. So there's a lot that Azure Sentinel can do for you. There's about 60 pre-built data connectors, but it also supports the CIF, CEF standard, as well as syslog. So you can pretty much connect it to anything, both in the cloud and in the and on-prem. So you got a lot of different things that you can do with it to connect it to different systems, and then build reports, those type of things. Chris also mentioned kind of the orchestration and automated response pieces. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in automating response to different things, either triggering an incident, triggering an alert, those kind of things, down to some remediation through a playbook. What he's got there on the right side of the screen, the playbook and logic apps, those are new. The other piece that's also new are the notebooks, and I'll show you some of that kind of stuff. So, Chris, if you want to go ahead and stop sharing, I'll share my screen out.
And I did, I just stopped sharing, but I did just put in the chat. I just realized I skipped my my demo on access reviews. So when you finish up, Jim, I'll jump back into access reviews.
Okay. No worries. I'll try and wrap it up here pretty quick. So this is Azure Sentinel. This is running live in the improving tenant. So as Chris mentioned, I won't click through some things because I don't want to expose any data. So this is the kind of the homepage to Azure Sentinel. So what type of things do you do with it? Like I said, it took me literally when I set it up maybe a couple hours to get it up and get the logs ingested and start building some of the dashboards I want to look at. So it was pretty straightforward to get set up. It's not free. It does charge by the amount of data ingested. So if you're pulling in just unfiltered data and you can cut that down, the amount of data to cut the cost that's out there when you look at the type of things that you want to look at. Before it gets into there, you can help control your costs. But you get this nice overview panel. It shows all the event logs that are out there. And so, what do you do with it? So really, it's under this threat management, this section right in here. So you've got incidents, workbooks, hunting, notebooks, which are new, that allow you to do different things in there, to be able to go in and look for particular things. So I'm going to go into, right now, there's no incidents, which is good. At least there weren't last time I checked. I do have a few things noted for incidents, so we don't have any there. But on the workbook, so there's a ton of templates built out there for various things out there. And then you see right here, there's actually a Azure Sentinel community sign-in logs to launch those. So what's a workbook really? So a workbook is kind of an investigation template into a particular area. So I've actually pulled in a couple into my workbooks. So I have the Office 365, and I'm just going to go in and hop into that workbook. And this will give me, so I've got to pick the workload. So I'm going to look at all, and I'm going to look at regular users. And then this will generate the workbook. So it shows me what's going on very quickly, and I can drill into all of these. So updates and creates, there's just a ton of information in there, and it's that fast. There's an immense amount of data that comes in. I think we're pulling in it's probably gone through 20 gig of data as it does this. So there's various queries behind that. So you got a lot of different things you can do. Just monitoring. So, as Chris mentioned, is some of the nice dashboards and some of the things you can look at in other places is surfaced in other ways. It's familiar to the other things he's shown because it's being generated through log analytics and being surfaced. And there's a custom query language behind it where you can actually customize any of these to anything in particular that you're looking for. The next part that I'll talk about is hunting. So hunting is I'm really looking for things in particular. So I can look at consent. I can run the query, and this is why I mentioned the query language. Hopefully this doesn't return anything. And you can do custom queries. Let's see. Yeah, so there's a few things out there. We do have as Chris mentioned, we're a pretty good sized organization. We're over 1,000 users now. So there's a lot of, the one I picked was application registration. So it shows me what's going on out there. I can kind of go through, like I know who a lot of these guys are and kind of what they're doing to see what they're doing. So you can drill into this. It gives you a good view into the query on how it's generated. You can actually edit these to get into this a little bit more detail. So you have the ability to hunt. If you're looking for something in particular through the logs, you can get very granular with it. I mentioned, so the overview kind of gives you this big picture of what's going on throughout it. The other piece that you have are dashboards. So you can actually build dashboards into Azure. And I have that tab open. And so there's several dashboards that I've built. Some of them are pre-built. Some of them you can customize. So if I'm looking at this is the kind of the general overview dashboard, it shows me this is around Office 365. What's going on by service that's out there. So it's showing me where things are going, what's going on in the services. The other one, so there's a couple of these I look at pretty much every day. So I do look at the Azure AD sign-ins just to make sure there's nothing crazy going on in sign-in. And sometimes these guys don't refresh correctly. So this gives me the what's going on throughout the environment, and I would expect low and off hours, and then peaks coming in. So you get used to what the graphs look like, those kind of things. It becomes pretty easy to look at these. So I look at this is user base, so what's going on, who's using what. That's Azure AD. Chris talked about the unified audit log. This is looking at that, but I can filter it based on kind of user type information, or audit, which is people making changes. As Chris mentioned, we're in the process of integrating a couple new companies in. So there's actually a lot of user changes happening, and you'll see some spikes for some things as we're getting those things done on what's going on out there. So there's a lot of different activities happening as you see the user management. If I back this up to last weekend, we onboarded probably 150 new people into a couple areas. So there was a huge spike. And I actually go back and look at it to see, I want to see correlations to the actions that I'm taking to get in there. So it gives you that ability to visualize your data, and you kind of get used to what the data pattern looks like, and it may trigger you to dive in and look at those type of things through Azure Sentinel. So there's a lot of different things you can look at in that range. That's a really quick overview of what it is. The last piece that I do want to show, and it's relatively new, is analytics. And analytics, I've got a few things set up here. These are, you can create rules. Microsoft's got a bunch of rules out there you can customize, and then you can build incidents based off these rules. So I've got some of these in use. I've got the attack detection, identity attack detection rule to create incidents inside of Sentinel. So I've got a few that I've turned on based on some things I want to see, and they'll actually build incidents if they get triggered and alert me to them. So things will happen. The last piece that, like I said, the notebooks, behavior and threat intelligence are all in preview. Notebooks is built on logic apps, so you can actually kind of have it's kind of like a run book. It leverages some of the analytics and automation to take actions on things. I'll show you quickly the connectors. So there's 60 default connectors out there. You can see it's not all just Microsoft that's built out there. You can pull in from Checkpoint or Cisco. There's a whole bunch of things out there, ForcePoint, Proofpoint, but it also supports the Ceph, and you can pull it in from pretty much anything. So you've got a lot of opportunity to pull information in there if you want to see it. And as I mentioned, just kind of closing, there's a whole community behind it. They actually have the link to it right here, where you can go out, and all of these things people are building these. As they find things that are useful, they'll post them out to GitHub and allow people to download and implement them. So it's always expanding and always growing. And I use, like I said, I'm in Azure Sentinel almost every day, and it's a great tool for me. I said, as I've learned what the graphs should look like and what the data should look like, I don't even have to drill into the reports unless I get a trigger or an incident. So with that, Chris, I'll stop. Hopefully I left you enough time to go back into into your
Yeah, and do apologize for skipping over that. So I know we're on the hour, so if people want to hold on, great, I appreciate it. But we will have the recording up here as well. So if you do have to drop, you can go to our website and find the recording. But I do want to jump back into access reviews, because those are actually really, really powerful. So let me go back to my demo tenant here. Okay. Now this is access reviews does require Azure AD P2 licensing for specific activities. So not all your users have to be licensed for access reviews or Azure AD P2, but the people who are conducting the access reviews need to be licensed with Azure AD P2. So if I look in here under identity governance in Azure, I'll click on access reviews. And I think these make a little bit more sense when we drill through creating a new one. So I'm just going to say demo. But what do I want to look at? So I want to start this review today. How often do I want this review to occur? I can say, recur every week, every month, quarterly, annually, however I want. Or I can just run it one time. If I do say, reoccur weekly, it gives me a slider here on how often the duration is. I can actually bring it down to do it every 2 days, but only let it last for the period of the review to last for 2 days, but reinitiate this review every week if we wanted to. Then if I wanted to end it after a specific time or let it run indefinitely, I can easily do that, and we can modify those afterwards. But the purpose of an access review is really to look at an application or a group, the membership or access to one of these. So this is contextual. So if I select member of a group, you'll notice here my scope can be guest users only or everyone, but it gives me the select group as far as who can be a reviewer. It can be the owners, it can be specific people I identify, or it can be the members of the group, which is considered a self-review. Same thing with an application. If I change it to app, I can still say the scope is guest only or everyone. I'll select an application instead of a group, but my reviewers change to selected users. I have to specify the users to conduct a review, or everyone who is assigned to the app, which is considered a self-review. So the difference between a self-review and what I would say an administrative review is a self-review asks every user who is a member of a group or has access to an application, do you still need to be this member? Do you still need access to this application? And it requires them to respond. In that case, every user has to have an Azure AD P2 license because they are now actively participating in the review process. But let's say it's an application and I know who the app owners are. I can say select users and send it to only those select users. So I'll use the example of our CSP help desk. That is an app in Azure AD that all of your company accounts, so you don't have it at improving.com, you all have guest accounts into our improving tenant. I could send an app review, well, someone could send an app review to me to say, do all these people still need access to our CSP help desk? And then it would be my responsibility to go back and certify access on behalf of everyone that is a member of that application. In that case, only I have to be licensed with Azure AD P2. So I'm going to just use a member of a group here. I'm going to select a random group. I'm not going to complete the creation of one, but I'm going to say select everyone. It's kind of cool that we can scope this to guest users only, because that way we can easily identify who are external parties that we want to maybe remove or clean out of our environment. But I'm going to say everyone, so it goes to internal and external users. I selected that all company group there. Who do I want to review? I'm going to say members, so everyone who's a member of all company is going to get this review. A program is really just a collection of access reviews. So if you have a compliance team that does audits or whatnot against the environment, you may have 20 different access reviews that you can compile into a program. So it just gives them an easier view of all those reviews to ensure that everything that they're auditing is being maintained properly. The last item here is, what do you want to do when these access reviews are conducted? So again, this is the members replying back because I'm doing a self-review. If they reply back and say, you know what, I don't need access to this group anymore, if I set to auto apply, it'll automatically remove that user from that group. I can set this to disable so they can just report back and say, you know what, I don't need membership, and then I have to come back and review the results and then take action myself. But I could let the access review go ahead and do that. If someone doesn't respond, I have options. I can say, you know what, go ahead and remove their access. If they don't respond, it's obviously not important enough for them. Or maybe I would say, you know what, if they didn't respond, maybe they overlooked it. I don't want to do any change to them. But I could take an action here and a recommendation. I'll show you that here in a second, but based on the user behavior and the usage, Azure is going to provide a recommendation. So if it's an app that it doesn't see a user logging into that often, it may make the recommendation of, you know, I don't think they need access anymore. And we can tell it to automatically take that action if we wanted to. And then there's some settings here on what we want to show in the notification. So if I would hit start, it would kick off a new access review, and it does take a little while for these to spin up. But what will happen, let me go back here, is everyone will receive a notification. So I already created this all employees self monthly review, and every employee is a self review. So every person has to respond themselves. Well, my administrative account is part of that group. So I got a notification, an email, when I kicked off that access review. It says, hey, I have an access review. Please review this. And it gives me a button. If I click on that, it takes me to the My Access portal for my account. And in here, I can say, you know what, do I still need access or no? Yes, I need access and I need to provide a reason. This is a configuration that I've made. I could say allow people to approve their access without a reason. I'm going to say I'm the admin. When I click submit, it will go ahead and respond back to the access review itself. If I go back to the right portal here, okay, so I don't know if this will give me quick enough updates, but it will actually show me then the stats, maybe. And it's probably not going to update fast enough. But would give me a graphical visual of who has responded, who hasn't responded, and what they responded with. And it said it does take a little bit for that to go through, but I could change the settings. So if I ran this indefinitely, I could come in here and say, you know what, from a schedule, whoops, sorry, in the settings here on the scheduling, I can change this. You know what, I want to make it semi-annual. So I can still tweak certain things on my access review here if I wanted to. But you know, I made this set so it automatically applies. So if I said no, I didn't need access to that group, it would have automatically removed me from that group. So that's the power of access reviews. So with that being said, that pretty much wraps up the content that we had to go over here. I do want to point out this was our 4th session. We do have a 5th one coming up in November, and that's going to be on control and app access. That's going to be looking at things like MCAS and how we can kind of monitor and manage apps. Also looking at how we can integrate apps into Azure AD so that we're leveraging things like single sign-on for even third-party SaaS apps. So that'll be kind of a cool session to go through, and that's scheduled for November 10th. If you go to our website listed here, whoops, I shouldn't have clicked that. I can't highlight on my slide here, but if you go to improvement.com/services/cloud solution provider, you'll see our schedule as well as links to register if you haven't already, or links to view previous sessions. So with that, I know we talked a lot, or I talked a lot at least. Any questions from anybody?
And nothing really came across in the chat. What I will say is there's a ton of information we went through and a ton of different things. If you guys have particular questions or how to apply this in your environment, just you know, let Chris or myself know.
Yeah, absolutely. We can always looking for feedback, so I will be sending out a feedback link. And if everyone would be so kind to fill that out, it will help us develop our next series for first half of next year. So if there's certain topics you want to hear about, definitely let us know, because we want these to provide the most value to our CSP customers. So tell us what you want to learn about, and we'll do as much as we can to help you out. But if there are no other questions, then you know, I'll wrap up by saying, you know, I appreciate everyone's time and you know, willingness to attend the webinars, and hopefully you guys learned something through the presentation. But if you ever have any questions, as Jim said, don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you very much.